Hello and welcome back to the Now We Know Show, the show where we discuss a topic of interest and by the end we will have learnt something new and hopefully you will too. I'm Zak.
I'm Buzz.
And I'm Jack.
And in this episode, we're going to be finding out and discussing all about UFOs.
Ooh. What is a UFO?
The truth is out there, as they say. Right, well, first of all, let's ask the computer, shall we? Shall we do that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, computer, what's a UFO?
According to the Oxford Dictionaries, the abbreviation UFO, which stands for Unidentified Flying Object, dates back to the 1950s. It refers to objects in the sky that current scientific theories have no ability to explain, and people most commonly associated with extraterrestrial beings.
There you go.
There we
So
are.
that's what the computer has to say on it.
So it kind of implies that a UFO is kind of undefinable.
Yeah, and flying as well, which I thought was
Yeah.
interesting. Does it have to be flying?
Well,
Yeah.
that's exactly the thing. The abbreviation UFO, Unidentified Flying Object, has become kind of out of date. Really,
Yeah.
they're changing it to other abbreviations. The most
really?
popular one at the moment is a UAP, which is an unidentified atmospheric phenomenon.
Right.
But also the US Navy, I don't know if anybody else uses it, but they also have AAV for an anomalous aerial vehicle.
Right.
Okay, so they're all kind of similar things.
Similar,
yeah.
just different.
What
Yeah.
I can say is, when it comes to the unidentified atmospheric phenomenon, the reason people, talking about them again, are trying to get us away from the UFO scenario is because most people kind of associate UFO. Well, you're going to be bringing up about UFOs.
Yeah,
in
I've got a
minute.
couple of instances
Yeah.
where UFOs have been reported.
That's right, and because of the initial reports of unidentified flying objects, and then the newspapers get hold of it, turn it into your synonymous kind of
'Cause that's the thing.
flying saucer.
UFOs are synonymous with the idea of aliens.
Yeah, that's why they're trying to get away from that. Drop the UFO and change it to unidentified
is-
atmospheric phenomenon.
Yeah.
Basically, it kind of means the same, and I think I'm right in saying they also feel that it's since, and we're going to talk about more recent sightings, etc., as we go through this podcast. But I think it's that they also are going away from UFO because of the word flying.
Right.
Because I heard I think it was a US pilot being interviewed, and it was that these things that have been observed, unlike what we consider conventional flying as an aeroplane or a bird would do in our sense. So if you think of something flying, you kind of think under those parameters, a bird flying, a plane flying. These things don't act in the same way. Yeah, so it's not flying in the way we can
Define flying.
define flying.
So the physics are all different to what we'd expect
yeah,
from
they
something.
break a lot of the rules of the physics of flying.
Or what we know about physics.
Yeah. So that's why they've decided to change it to that unidentified atmospheric phenomenon.
So is that more of a broader term then?
Yeah, I think so. But then when we go back to just even the term unidentified flying object, for me, I never kind of when you're a kid, you kind of think, ooh, UFOs, as in spaceships, aliens,
Flying saucers and
flying
things.
saucers.
But that's the thing. It doesn't necessarily mean
no,
aliens.
all it means is an unidentified thing that is
Flying.
flying through the air.
That hasn't got an identifiable
it's just unidentified
characteristic. Yeah.
And there's lots of these phenomenon which have been observed, and I'll talk about ones I've seen later on. But and then later on they can be explained. So although at the time of the sighting
They were unidentified.
later on then it's been cross-referenced. Maybe other people have seen the same phenomenon, and then they go, well actually it was such and such, and then it becomes an identified object and dismissed.
It ceases to be a UFO.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or
So
UAP.
what we're discussing is we want to get to the end of this podcast to see how we feel about the whole
Idea.
of these UFOs or unidentified atmospheric phenomenon. So from the start, I mean, I don't know what you guys feel about whether they are a real thing or not, and I'm not going to reveal what I think about it. So I think we should all kind of try and get through this podcast, discuss everything that we've got from our research, etc., and then see how we feel about it at the end. And you listening in, we'd love you to do the same. You've obviously probably had experiences or thoughts on this subject, or discussed this subject with your friends. So again, listen to the podcast, see what we sort of kick around, and then come to some kind of conclusion at the end. Do you think that's probably the best approach?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, the earliest recorded sighting of a UFO that I have found.
Right, so this is earliest, but in the age of communication.
Yes.
It's been documented, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is the earliest one I have found.
Okay.
In what we call the modern age.
Yes. So, this is a sighting from Kenneth Arnold in 1947.
Oh, I think, I've heard of this
Okay,
one.
so like we're past World War II at this point. World War II's been over for 2 years. So what would you see in the skies at that time? Sorry, I'm kind of setting the scene.
Okay. The origin of today's fascination can be traced back to civilian pilot Kenneth Arnold. While flying his small aircraft near Washington's Mount Rainier on June 24, 1947, Arnold claimed to have seen 9 blue glowing objects flying fast and at an estimated 1,700 miles per hour in a V formation.
Blimey.
He first believed the objects to be some sort of new military aircraft. This was, after all, just 2 years after World War II, as Jack said, and the first year of the Cold War. But the military confirmed there were no tests being conducted near Mount Rainier that day. When Arnold described the craft's motion as similar to a saucer if you skip it across water, the media coined the now ubiquitous phrase "flying saucer."
Yeah,
Okay, so that's where
that's
that
exactly that's where it stems from.
Yeah.
That's where it all stems from, the term flying saucer.
Out of interest, how quickly did you say they were travelling, or reportedly travelling?
1,700 miles per hour.
How close is that relative to an aircraft at that time?
Oh, I don't think this is obviously, as you say, just a couple of years after World War II. Everything was subsonic then, surely. I mean,
Yeah.
but I mean, the Germans were developing or had developed the V2 rockets, but in order for long distance strikes. But aircraft,
I don't think they would have reached that speed until
I don't
the
know.
60s at least at the earliest.
Yeah.
I have a bit more information on this.
Okay, carry on.
Soon other reports of a group of 9 UFOs cropped up across the region, including sightings by a prospector on Mount Adam and the crew of a commercial flight in Idaho. The government never offered a credible explanation for the sightings. It simply claimed Arnold had seen a mirage or was hallucinating, but UFO mania had set in, and just a few weeks later the infamous Roswell sighting would perpetuate the obsession.
Right, yeah, good old Roswell. So Roswell was
That's
also
one of the most famous I've heard of. Roswell.
okay. So,
Funnily enough, that is the next sighting that I'm going to.
okay, so you got the dates and details on the
Yeah.
Roswell
Yeah.
one. I've just googled up the World War II plane speed.
Okay.
And we were talking over 1,000 miles an hour.
1,200, did you say?
1,700.
Oh,
Okay,
700.
so
yeah.
what I've just googled is the fastest plane to see action during World War II, and that would be the Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet, which had a maximum speed of 702 miles per hour.
Blimey, so
So
nearly 1,000
yeah.
miles per hour
But-
quicker
Yeah,
than any
and
any
what was the
aircraft.
chap's name?
Kenneth
Yeah,
Arnold.
and he was just flying a light aircraft.
Yeah, civilian
So
pilot.
civilian aircraft
So,
is
yeah.
going to not even touch upon even that speed.
Blimey.
But it's interesting to note that that is where the flying saucer, or the term flying saucer, came from.
Yeah.
Generated by the US press,
Yeah.
obviously.
How many did you say there were in a V formation?
Instead of V formation, I think it was
9.
9 in a V
9
formation.
blue glowing objects.
So I assume they were saucer shaped.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
well, so you've got if you think of a flock of geese
Yeah.
flying,
Yeah.
then that gives you that V formation.
Hmm.
I know that there's been a lot of sightings of when they say like triangular,
Yeah.
and if you had 3 dots, that would be triangular. But I'm assuming, still haven't seen a picture, and there is no, I presume, recorded picture of this. This is kind of, I'm imagining it to be like a flock of geese in that V
Yeah.
formation. If there's 9. Yeah, 1 at the tip, 4 each
That,
side.
that is to do with aerodynamics, isn't it?
Yeah, they get
Okay.
the slipstream of what's
Yeah.
in front, and it makes the lead goose, the geese now. Lead goose is doing a lot more work,
yeah.
and then it's creating a slipstream, and that travels out, and that's why they spread out into that V
And then they
formation.
cross over.
Yeah.
And then they change it over. And
Yeah,
such
they
things,
reorganise.
Not that I'm a
It's interesting.
goose expert.
Next,
Maybe we can
next
do a
time on the
podcast.
podcast.
Geese.
It's interesting you talk about where we're at the moment in this timeline, because I'm sure I've heard things about certain kind of units in World War II seeing flying objects. There's a famous one. There's a photograph of it, isn't there, when they're all the lights are shining on one thing in the sky, and they fired off however many rounds they fired off, but there was never anything found or seen.
I'm assuming that if you were visiting, we don't really. One thing we don't want to talk too much about is aliens in this one, do we? We're kind of focusing more on the phenomenon
this
of
was
it. But
a
if you're,
UFO thing,
visiting beings from wherever you're visiting from, and you're getting all these people sending up incendiary flare rounds at you while the other gunners are going for it, you're going, I don't think we'll bother. I think we'll go home.
Give this one a miss.
That's the thing.
We'll come back in a few years' time.
Because obviously this was the earliest report that I found.
Yeah.
But obviously, throughout history, in murals and things, ancient cave
I may be
paintings and things.
completely wrong, but they've termed the term ancient aliens, haven't they?
Yeah, I'd love to do a podcast
where
on that.
there are. We'd need to cover this really, in maybe we can cover this. We're going to be doing a further podcast specifically looking at the phenomenon of aliens.
Yeah.
And so I think we could probably look at that, but in the research that we do for that, we can find out if what we say in this one actually holds any water.
Yeah.
I may recall seeing images of cave paintings or something which might be reminiscent of. I think people do they call them alien greys? Things like that. And from cave paintings upwards.
One of the Egyptian hieroglyphics is literally a disc shape, and a lot of people think they got that from a flying saucer.
And there's a lot of speculation about the pyramids of Giza being landing areas.
Yeah,
Stargate.
And even the pharaohs having like the headdresses on, they think is some sort of inspiration from another being.
I think Battlestar Galactica, the original TV series, took.
Yeah.
If you ever see that, or Google a screenshot, the helmets that the pilots wear are exactly that kind of pharaoh
look.
So we're seeing that across. So there must, I think there must be references further back than that.
But we'll save that for another podcast.
We'll save that for another time. We basically want to see if, because that might be ancient people seeing these atmospheric phenomenon and trying to put them into some kind of context themselves.
Try to explain
so
it.
We'll stick from that first.
Yes.
Sighting 1947.
Next up, we have Roswell.
Right, the infamous Roswell.
The classic UFO story, I think.
This has been covered so many times by so many movies, and TV series.
Okay.
Even Indiana Jones, I think.
Yeah.
It's the mother of all UFO sightings, but no object was actually observed flying in the Roswell incident. In the summer of 1947, rancher William Mack Brazel discovered mysterious debris in one of his New Mexico pastures, including metallic rods, chunks of plastic, and unusual papery scraps. After Brazel reported the wreckage, soldiers from the nearby Roswell Army Air Force Base came to retrieve the materials. News headlines claimed a flying saucer crashed in Roswell, but military officials said it was only a downed weather balloon. Ever since, conspiracy theorists have been hard at work trying to prove the wreckage was extraterrestrial, with one man, Ray Santilli, going so far as to release a video in 1995 of an alien dissection, reported to have taken place after the incident. Santilli would admit in 2006 that it was a staged film, but he maintained that it was based on actual footage.
There's a film with Ant and Dec, isn't there? The Roswell. Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, they're all about that, yeah.
I've not done that. It was bringing the
track it down.
Images of the film Paul.
Yeah.
It's going to go to mind.
Well, I can picture it because it's got like a big bulbous head, isn't it? It's
big
very
black
grainy.
eyes, and it's a very grainy black and white film, isn't it?
It's very convincing. If it obviously is false now, but it's very well done.
As it turns out, the government was indeed covering up something, but it wasn't aliens. The crashed weather balloon was in fact part of a top-secret military endeavour called Project Mongol, which launched high-altitude balloons carrying equipment used to detect Soviet nuclear tests. The Air Force provided plenty of proof in a 231-page report released in 1997 called Case Closed, Final Report on the Roswell Crash. Though the mystery has been thoroughly debunked, interest in the case has only grown, and Roswell's tourism is heavily based around its famous so-called UFO sighting. The town is home to the International UFO Museum and Research Centre, a spaceship-shaped McDonald's, and an annual UFO festival held each summer.
Right.
Ooh, that's a Now We Know show trip waiting to happen.
Now, obviously, we're in the UK, but I can't. Do you guys know? I can't, something's coming to my memory. That's kind of not far from Area 51. Am I right or wrong? Because isn't there a UFO restaurant place?
Nevada, isn't it?
Yeah, isn't there a restaurant place right outside Area 51 as well. Is it as well, or is it the same place? I don't know.
Possibly.
Maybe somebody can comment on that.
I think Area 51 is in Nevada.
Yeah,
I'm
Nevada.
not
Yeah.
sure about where Roswell is located. But
Okay.
maybe we're just putting 2 and 2 together.
Yeah, maybe.
Although, to be fair, because they always say that alien autopsy thing took place in Area 51. So potentially, if we were right to believe that the alien crashed at the Roswell site and then was taken to Area 51, it can't be too far away. That's just my logic, anyway.
I just assumed that Area 51 was kind of it's the big secret base.
Where they filmed the moon landing.
Where the Ark of the Covenant is stored.
That's the thing that there's a satellite image of Area 51, and there's a certain rock formation that's exactly the same as it was on the moon photos.
Ooh,
So
Oh dear me, we missed that
Aye.
one out, didn't we?
back to the moon landings episode.
I just thought it interesting bringing up Area 51.
So have you got any feelings on? I mean, obviously.
Well, something certainly happened.
The interesting thing I took from that was when he said he admitted to faking it, but it was based on real footage, which is interesting to me.
But
'Cause
then
that's like,
later on, you said in 1997 that it got completely debunked.
Yeah,
But then
they
he's-
released a case file, didn't they?
but then he said it was based on real footage. So
Yeah.
it might not have necessarily been connected, but there might still be footage
Of
or
something.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
They might have just put that together as the story, but
Yeah.
it could be fragmented slightly.
So we have the infamous Roswell. So we've gone from basically a light aircraft pilot seeing his V formation shortly after Roswell crash. Of course, you've already therefore got UFO fever in the press. It would seem that many years down the line it gets debunked and it actually is a high altitude kind of weather balloon, and it is very strange how you get all these repeated times where it's put down to being a high altitude weather balloon when there's incidences, and they say, oh no, it's not any kind of craft other than a high altitude weather balloon. So but talking about UFOs, that's the thing, it's not the case of just jumping straight to thinking it's little green men from Mars in a flying saucer, because UFO, as we said before, it's just an unidentified
Flying object. It could be a plane.
Which is technically
Could be
what
a
this
plane.
weather balloon was. to a
Yeah,
certain
it
extent.
was an unidentified flying
And
object.
that reminds me of probably my earliest UFO sighting when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah.
So I may as well tell you about that, because I have seen things, and I'll bring them up as we go, and this is an ideal opportunity for me on this one. I remember being at primary school, it was lunchtime, playing out on the school field with my friends, kicking a ball about or whatever. I remember it being a sunny day, but with nice big cotton wool bubbly clouds. And it was one of my friends just said, oh, look at that. And I remember turning and looking, so there was a group of us, and I'll describe it as nothing other than obviously it was up in the sky and quite a way away from us, but it was just like a silver glowing cigar-shaped object
Okay.
that was tracking, not too fast, but it was tracking across the blue sky between the clouds. And that's exactly what it was like. People describe them as being like cylindrical,
Right.
and this was silver in its shine.
It was obviously close enough for you to see that it was.
see it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
to
I
see
mean,
it was
it-
silver and what
it-
shape it was and everything.
It was an object and you could see it, and it was just travelling through that one of the blue patches.
It was almost like a plane without wings.
Yes,
Yeah.
the shape was the same at both ends.
Okay, yeah.
So you got round at both ends, like a cigar tube, but
Right.
not with a flat end and a round.
From what you were describing, it kind of reminds me from Star Wars. I think it's in Attack of the Clones when they go back to Tatooine. They're in like a silver
Oh, so,
kind of
yeah.
Naboo shuttle type
Yeah.
thing.
Well, that was
looks-
kind of pointy. That one,
Yeah,
if
that
I
one
could-
was pointy.
But this
That's
was
what
just
I'm
like
kind of
so.
picturing.
I know we're going to talk about the Tic Tac sightings, or the US Navy have described them as Tic Tacs because of for those people that don't know what a Tic Tac is, it's a little oval. It's like a
It's
tube,
like a pill shape.
like a pill shape, like a tube with a rounded end at each end. So
Yeah.
its dimensions are identical, and so
It's a
elongate that into more of a cigar shape
yeah.
length, and that's what I saw. But not just me. A group of kids around me saw it, and then as that tracked through, it went behind a cloud, and then it didn't come out the other side.
Ooh.
Did you get visited by a man in a black suit?
No. Well, no. I've got actually a story.
Because
not-
this
not
was
quite
in
like-
England, wasn't
This
it?
was in England. This was actually in Hertfordshire,
Ooh.
and the place of all sorts of folklore.
Yeah, as we've discovered.
As we've
We're
discovered.
uncovering some
Yeah,
crazy things.
and that's what I saw. And for years, I assumed to myself, as a kid, you've got furtive imagination. Wow, that was an amazing UFO. Like many have been observed and described. However, as an adult, looking back at that, because I've observed very similar things like that, where it looked, wow, it's caught my attention. It's this glowing silver object travelling across the sky, and then its course slowly changes, and the sun stops reflecting off the body of the passenger jet.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You see, and so after seeing that later on in my years, seeing this glowing object and thinking, wow, the sun's, not that the sun's beaming off this thing, there's this glowing cigar-shaped thing travelling through the air, and then it's gradually turned its direction on its flight path, and then it's obvious that actually what I'm seeing is just a passenger plane
Yeah.
Oh, right,
at
okay.
high altitude. And the sun's just been reflecting off its, because a lot of passenger planes could be silver or even white, and they'll reflect the sunlight.
Yeah.
And then
The
going
windows
back
and
to my childhood and seeing that, then I think to myself, actually, now I'm pretty much convinced that what I saw on that day, as well as my friends, was not a flying saucer, but actually probably was a high altitude plane that was just, because it was a sunny day with clouds,
Bright day.
and I'm thinking about the direction I was looking, the school, I was on the field, I was looking towards the school. There was houses behind the school. We look at the sky and the clouds and everything. The one thing that is not in my memory, the one thing I was not looking at was the sun. If the sun had been in front of me,
You would have had to.
I would have been covering
shield
my
your
eyes and
eyes,
shield my
yeah.
eyes. The sun was probably
Yeah, you probably had a
off to
long,
one side
long
behind me.
shadow in front of you.
It was probably off to one side or directly behind, which is making the reflection off that aircraft happen.
Yeah.
And when it went behind the cloud, it wasn't like it went behind a little cloud. It went behind quite a big chunk of cloud and never appeared out the other side. It could be, again, that it's just changed its flight path a little bit, enough that the sun is now not reflecting in our direction and causing that glow.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to get to is not everything you see
Yeah.
is going to be a flying saucer.
So, in identifying it,
Yeah.
it's at that point when it becomes not a UFO.
Not a UFO.
Because you
technically-
have identified it
Yeah,
as
certainly
a
From
plane.
your perspective, it was UFO, but if it was a plane, then obviously it's not unidentified because they always,
Yeah.
you know.
At that time, when I was a kid, it was and stayed for many of my years a UFO.
Yeah.
But then later on in adulthood, when I observed a similar phenomenon and then observed it long enough for that plane to then become visible because the glare off of it died down, then it was like, now we've gone from unidentified to identified.
Yes.
In the first instance, when I was a kid, it was unidentified and I never had the opportunity to see it become unidentified.
Yes.
Now, you could argue maybe it was some kind of phenomenon, which it wasn't an aeroplane.
Yeah.
But because I've seen something so similar,
Yeah.
now I look back and I think, well, no, it would probably,
Logically. Yeah.
logically that was a plane.
Yeah.
Although, just like I've
Did
said,
shoot laser beams.
just like I've said in previous podcasts, I'd love, for example, to know that Sasquatch
Yeah.
are a thing. And I'm not discounting it because, as we discussed in that one, the space in America, for example, and Russia and places like that, so huge that it could conceal something. So I'm not going to say yay or nay, but this is how I kind of feel with the UFOs, but more yay than nay, as we will reveal as we go on.
Okay.
Okay.
Nice teaser for the rest of this.
Yeah, a bit of a teaser there.
So, would we like the next sighting?
So that
Yeah,
was
yeah.
Roswell, so that was
So that was
1950.
That was 47.
47 again.
Same year,
Summer
okay.
47.
Okay, next sighting. The Lubbock Lights in 1951.
The Lubbock, where is Lubbock? Is that the States again?
Yeah,
Okay.
Texas.
Texas.
Okay. On the evening of August 25th, 1951, 3 science professors from Texas Tech were enjoying an evening outdoors in Lubbock. when they looked up and saw a semicircle of lights flying above them at high speed. Over the next few days, dozens of reports flooded in from across the town. Texas Tech freshman Carl Hart Jr. even snapped photos of the so-called Lubbock Lights phenomenon, which were published in newspapers across the country, and Life magazine. Project Blue Book, which led the Air Force inquiries into UFOs, investigated the events, and its official conclusion was that the lights were birds reflecting the luminescence from Lubbock's new street lamps. Many people who saw the lights, however, refused to accept this explanation, arguing that the lights were flying too fast.
A very interesting correlation there with reflecting lights.
Yes, but there's the first thing I picked up on that one was that it seems to be the first one that you've described that's actually had a photographical picture taken.
Yeah.
The first one, it was a report. It was like aircraft. Second one, Roswell. Nobody saw anything flying, just reported wreckage. This one, we have a photograph. Suppose I haven't seen the photograph, so I don't know if we can punch that up at some point. But if you've got new street lights, I mean, street lights normally, surely they kind of beam downwards, upwards. I don't know. What year was that?
51.
So I don't know whether they were a bit more blatant with their streetlights and just let them go and beam out in all directions. But how often do you see illuminated birds?
Especially at night.
Yeah.
Well, it's not really natural for birds to be illuminated.
Oh, right. So Jack's just punched up now.
That's interesting.
That's pretty much exactly how I imagined it when you
Yeah, but look at listeners. We've now got a picture of the Lubbock Lights, and
it's this V formation again, isn't it?
It's V formation, but that V formation is way too wide to be geese or any birds. They wouldn't fly like that because there seems to be two rows. Firstly, one V behind the other V, but they are. All those birds would almost on the front row would be lead birds because they're not
blobs.
They're not getting any benefit from the slipstream from the bird that would be the lead bird. The V has to be tighter.
There's no visible wings there at all.
Well, I mean, let's face it. When I saw the reflection of that passenger aircraft, I couldn't see the wings because the light blurs it out. Yeah. And now this is night time, but honestly, with street lights
going up
that much power upwards.
Yeah, especially at that altitude.
There's a more kind of defined there. It's kind of been rotated from the last picture, but it's the same photo. But they're very bright.
No,
that's definitely unidentified.
I would say that if you've got a bird that's big enough to, if you think of a bird like a swan or a goose, which is a biggish bird,
goose again.
Well, even swans, they fly V formation. But so a swan is a big bird and it's white.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was reflecting light underneath it and it's got its wings spread out, what you were showing me would just uniform circular dots?
Yeah. I suppose you've got to take into account the cameras back then, probably.
Yeah, you're going to get... I don't know.
What did you say was actually reflecting off the birds? Did you say they had something on them? Or?
It just said
that it was the luminescence from the new street lamps.
But it said something about the birds, though, didn't it?
Its official conclusion was that the lights were birds reflecting the luminescence from the new street lamps.
Yeah, so it's the luminescence. The light.
Surely there'd have to be something like metal or something to get that sort of bright light. It couldn't just be the the birds are.
If you take a photograph with your camera on your phone, if you take a photograph of the full moon, all you're going to get is a mushy blob.
Just a pinprick.
Because the light is so bright, it's so far away, it will not look. It doesn't resemble what it looks like with your eyes.
Yeah.
It will just be a blob. So, okay, if you beamed up some dirty great spotlights in the air to catch the underside of birds flying and photographed it, then maybe they would come out looking like illuminated blobs in a V formation.
Fair enough.
But that V formation you show me, I have never seen birds in a double V formation so close to each
sketchy
other.
It's more of a, like you said, it's more of a semicircle, isn't it?
Yeah.
In the report.
And you also, I mean, it's very wide.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're thinking, listeners, if you think of a normal V formation of birds, because I'm sure you've all seen them, and you touch your fingertips together to make that V formation, then open your hands up to a really kind of
obtuse
angle and have a secondary row behind the first row, but flying in between the gaps of the first row. Well, I've seen multiple bird formations when they're flying together. You get one V, and then you'll get a V further back, following
Yeah.
the tail bird on the other V.
Yeah.
Not
Not like that.
Yeah.
So that's definitely would seem to be an unidentified, atmospheric phenomenon.
Yeah.
Whether it's intelligence behind it. I think that's where we need to kind of start thinking at this point in the show, whether these phenomenon whether they're random natural phenomenon, or whether it's a phenomenon which has an intelligence behind it.
I think that would imply the aliens thing, though, wouldn't it?
Well-
That there's something inside piloting it, or
Okay, so if you think of something, right up to date, you go fly a drone. You've got your mobile phone connected to a control panel. You can see out of that drone's camera, and you're flying it. There is an intelligence behind that drone, but that drone itself isn't intelligent. But it is being guided by something, and that
It
something
has an
elsewhere.
intent. Yeah.
There's nothing in it that is a little green man flying the drone,
yeah,
but there is an intelligence behind
It's
what
kind
it-
of a
what it
similar
does.
instance to, like, for instance, when we send rovers to, like, Mars and stuff.
Yes, yeah.
Could it be that an intelligence is sending similar kind of rovers or drones
Well, that's what.
to
one of those-
observe us?
one of those things from Star Wars. Wah, 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 wah,
Yeah,
wah.
yeah, that's
They
the
send
impression
it,
that
send,
was.
send
I
it to
like that.
Hoth, and
To
yeah.
Hoth, yeah. Send out the probes. Find the rebel base. No, but that's great. That's what we're here to discuss. What can they be? Because we've all heard of ball lightning, where you get normal lightning, but this is like a burning energy ball. People have observed those coming literally through their windows and bouncing around the walls in the houses and things like that, and then dissipating. That's burning a hole on the carpet and things. That's a natural phenomenon
Yeah.
that is created by nature. And I'm sure there's all sorts of things, because people have seen. I mean, you've probably seen it yourself on the TV, where you see phosphorescent algae and corropium and things in the sea that make these amazing lights. And
Yeah.
things, if you were standing on the cliff tops and saw something out at sea which was just the shimmering lights, you'd think, well, what the hell is it? Sank under the sea? Is it something
Yeah.
weird? Nature has a plethora of phenomenon, which
We don't even know half
half
about.
of it.
Yeah.
And we can all see things such as, again, it depends on the heat of the sun and things. You would see a mirage, imagining you're seeing something that isn't, because what was that phrase you used the other day, when your mind sees something and then your brain has to make sense of it?
The uncanny valley.
Yeah. Are we talking in the same kind of way as that?
Loosely, I guess,
Yeah,
but
I guess. But I mean, the point is, your mind, when you see something, like you're in the forest and you see that log that's in the distance behind a couple of trees, and think, "Geez, is that?"
well, that's kind of a primeval thing for us,
yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah.
To-
So your mind's trying to make
Yeah.
sense of what you're seeing.
What separates it for me is the whole with the photograph evidence, because the first story I noticed with the guy in the plane could very easily be put down to him being like hallucinating, or maybe
He could have been
dehydrated,
flying
or
for too long.
something like in his mind has caused that image to
Appear.
I'm not being funny. He saw that was a V-shaped formation, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Of
and
9.
for another thing, he was doing one there, whereas this
Multiple
multiple
reports.
people have seen it, and there is photo evidence.
Yeah.
So for those ones tend to kind of capture my interest a lot more.
I agree, and I've got some in my research to talk about in a bit. But that's the fascinating thing on this subject. That's the crux. It is a thing.
Yeah.
You can't escape that. UFOs, UAPs are a thing.
If it is unidentifiable, it is a
Thing.
UFO
You-
or a
you-
UAP.
You cannot, in the first instance, stand there and state UFOs do not exist, because they do.
Literally,
what
it's a
it-
literal term.
But what it is where we need to find the research and
Yeah.
discussion. And then when you've got a sighting like this, where you say, and quite rightly, a lot of people have seen this sighting, and then you have photographical evidence to go on that as well, it is then you've got a tangible thing, haven't
Yeah.
you? A thing has happened.
Yeah.
There has been something there.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. In popular culture, you'd say that a spaceship or alien spacecraft would be a UFO. But at the point where you recognise it as an alien spacecraft, you have identified it as an alien spacecraft, it is no longer a UFO.
Because it's identified.
Yes.
It is now an identified
Alien object.
alien object.
Yes.
Well, yeah, well, that's
IAO.
exactly. It's an identified. What was the other abbreviation? Had AAV.
AAV, yeah.
Yeah, AAV. And,
Atmospheric. Something.
that was the
UAP?
anomalous
Oh.
aerial vehicle. So what you just described, where you say it's definitely not a natural phenomenon. It's definitely a something like a vehicle with that is acting in a way that there seems to be an intelligence behind it. Then it has become an anomalous aerial vehicle instead of an unidentified atmospheric phenomenon. Yes. Now that, whether that was an unidentified atmospheric phenomenon, but the structure of it, the structure in the photograph just seemed too regular to be just a phenomenon. It looked more like there was something,
An intent behind it.
yeah, something behind it to have that structure in its shape and uniformity. Do you
Yeah,
agree?
because one of those kind of pictures kind of look almost like a honeycomb type
Yeah.
thing. It's kind of dotted,
Exactly.
like in a formation.
Exactly.
It seemed organised.
Yeah, they weren't just splattered about everywhere. They were certainly flying in some kind of formation.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we need to discuss and kind of really get our teeth into in this discussion.
But first, should we move on to my next sighting?
Next
go
in,
for
in
it.
the timeline.
Okay, so
So that was 19.
that was the Lubbock Lights was in 1951.
Okay.
Now we're going forwards to 1957.
Okay.
So we're 10 years off Roswell.
Okay, Leviland, if I'm pronouncing that right,
Are
1957.
we still in the States, do you know?
I believe so.
I'm sensing a theme.
Yeah.
So, Leviland, 1957. In the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, there's a famous scene where a UFO makes the electronics in a car go haywire. The real-life inspiration for that scene came from an incident in 1957 when dozens of citizens of Leviland, Texas, individually reported seeing a rocket or strange lights that interfered with their vehicles, engines died, lights cut out. Though the police initially thought the reports were a hoax, they too saw the mysterious lights as they investigated the situation. Project Blue Book was assigned to investigate the case. Their findings: it was an electrical storm and ball lightning that caused the lights and the mechanical malfunctions, despite the fact that there were no reported thunderstorms in the area of that night.
Yeah. Well,
It's interesting that's the second time you've brought up the Blue Book thing. Do we know
Yeah.
what that is?
I presume that the Blue Book is the old organisation, or what do you call it?
Kind of Men in Black
Yeah, but what would you call it in a government?
investigation.
Yeah, department. There's going to be the government department of the US government. Whoever is assigned to Project Blue Book is that must be the old UFO sightings.
The X-Files, basically.
Kind of X-Files, because I'm going to bring it slightly up to date because you mentioned that.
Yep.
Because it's now the UAP, or the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force.
Okay, that's very blatant.
Yeah.
That sounds more aggressive, though, doesn't it? It seems
it
like
does.
we're in trouble.
Well, that's part of, if I'm right in saying, that's part of the US Navy. Since the Navy picked up video, which we'll discuss as we go along.
So by making it a
but
task...
they actually, sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, but the US government have officially now accepted that unidentified aerial phenomenon are a real thing, that there is so much evidence, and video evidence as well as photographic evidence, that it is not... well, there's no point in trying to cover it up anymore.
Yeah.
That's why they've released this information.
I suppose with the advent of the internet and things like this.
And they've released the well, also because these unidentified aerial phenomenon or AAVs could, regardless of what they are, where they're from, who's behind them or whatever, if it was an opposing military power that's got some really high-tech drones, or whether it's little green men from Mars or whatever. The thing is, they are finding these things, tracking these things. Their military planes are being buzzed by these things, and so they can quite honestly be a real threat in that a plane could have a collision and things. So they've set up this task force because it has to be there now.
Yeah.
To
Identify.
and
the
record
You
it.
said about the thing. You said about we need to decide whether it's a natural phenomenon or it's sentient. As soon as you said task force, that's
Yeah.
it. That's it for me. Because if it's natural, why would you need a task force?
Well, I'd like to think that what you need is scientific credibility regarding these investigations and these phenomenon, not what has been the case, which has mostly been speculative hypotheses on what they could be.
Yeah.
And I see that the American government has definitely taken a step down that road. They have now said they are a thing, and not only are they a thing, but we officially now have the
they're accepting
UAP
it.
task force.
Blimey.
And I will point out, they also have Star Force as well, don't they? Now?
Or Space Force, is
Space Force. It's
Yeah.
Space
Oh,
Force.
wow.
Yeah, so they have got an official
heard of Space Force, yeah.
They've got an official Space Force.
Become a stormtrooper today.
Yes. What's going on then?
Oh, yeah, that's interesting actually.
Yeah.
In terms of like where we go from here, the future.
Yeah.
If these things do turn out to be sentient, and it does kind of become common knowledge that there are things that could potentially visit us and they could be a threat, there's no reason why we shouldn't have a task force or a unit of the army that's dedicated to stopping things attacking us.
I see. Unlike finding other things like the Loch Ness monster and such like, again, the thing with these unidentified flying objects or UAPs, we'll just call them whatever comes first.
Yeah.
Okay? So used to call them UFOs. They are a thing.
Yeah.
The evidence is there. It's not. It's no longer is it pushed under the carpet and covered up. But it is a real. They are a real thing.
It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't feel like we were talking about folklore and things like this. It doesn't feel like a conspiracy anymore. It feels more like a.
Yeah, and that's kind of weird. I think we're jumping forward a little bit, but it's you kind of feel as if we're being now. Okay, guys, you've reached a point where if you had been told about this 100 years ago, you'd all be running for your pitchforks and going,
Witchcraft.
witchcraft. But now we live in a society where we've got touchscreen mobile phones. We're talking about
We have the world at our fingertips.
the not only the World Wide Web, we've got the Internet of Things. We've got Elon Musk going for his neuronet implants in the brain, so you can literally almost telepathically communicate with things. We've got what was the thing I mentioned to you? I asked you about earlier, Zach. It was
Describe it.
Where not virtual reality, it's the other
Metaverse.
the metaverse. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So
You can
people
go shopping and stuff.
literally
in your
go
metaverse.
into the metaverse.
Yeah.
I think if there's been
Ready Player One.
I think if there's
Matrix.
Now, I don't want to get all kind of conspiracy theory or anything like that. As I say, I'll try and sit on and look at things analytically, but you do get the kind of feeling to a certain degree that humanity at this stage, or the Western world, the majority of human beings, because literally most people, I think, have got modern technology, even if it's just a mobile phone.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like we've never been at a time in history where we would be as accepting now if first contact was revealed to us. If in the next 10 or 20 years, I'm not talking about a UFO or whatever landing in the middle of Hyde Park or landing on the lawn of the White House, but that if they in the know actually did say, well, actually we have had first contact.
Yeah.
I mean, if governments around the world had first contact at some point, or they do have first contact with anything, then they're not going to release that straight away. You don't want mad panic in the streets or whatever.
Because that would throw a lot into question.
Yeah, but you were going to probably wait for the right time, and especially
maybe if we have these kind of spatterings of sightings and things throughout history, maybe whatever's out there is revisiting and waiting for us to become
ready,
get to a point where they won't
we
won't attack them.
but again, we're kind of delving now. This is delving onto the edge of talking about aliens.
I think they come hand in hand to a certain extent.
They come in hand in hand, but let's drag it back a little bit and remind ourselves of the flat Earth. Okay.
Do we have to?
No. So the reason I mention that is because there are other theories, and in the flat Earth, it was inner terrestrials rather than extraterrestrials.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
people coming from a different continent beyond the ice wall.
And then there's the religious
Yeah.
perspective,
Yeah.
So
where we're the centre of everything.
Yeah. So rather than the hypothesis of there's other continents beyond the ice wall, but let's not forget there could be other answers to it, that they're not necessarily extraterrestrials, but it could be if there was a way for even the human race to be able to come from the future into the past.
I was going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
What if they're?
It could
what if
be.
it's just us from the
could
future?
be us from the future,
Yeah.
or it could be. I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts are of parallel universes and
Well,
things like that. I don't know because I don't have any particular
Yeah.
views on these things. But your go-to is outer space, aliens from outer space. But let's not forget there could be another view, other aspect. If it was time travel, if it was,
They could have been here with us the whole time and just never left.
it could be that.
They've never left. They've just been hiding.
Well, it's interesting.
They're not
because-
from another planet. They're from this planet, but they're just.
I mean, there's again. I think you've got some more stuff to come.
I do.
So I've got some stuff myself, which is more modern, and you've seen films like The Abyss, where they're deep in the trenches, deep in the sea, and things like that. So who knows? Who knows?
Or
I think we've got to allow our minds not to think 100% space aliens.
there's that thing about, I don't want to jump too ahead because we're obviously going to do this for a podcast, but there is the theory that we are the aliens and the meteorite that killed the dinosaurs was actually our spaceship,
Mothership.
our spaceship that crashed, and we kind of
The survivors, small patch of survivors, and then just gradually
exponentially grew and grew and grew.
and killed out the indigenous.
Yeah,
Maybe, who knows?
because we are so advanced than
Like us
everything
with
else.
the dodos.
Yeah.
We're so advanced than anything else on this planet. So.
Well, I was discussing this with Tina being my wife. Tina, we were off on a car journey, and in the car journey you have good chat. And I brought up when I was talking to you, Jack, about cavemen.
Yeah.
And how if you took a baby from, say, if somebody was 70,000 years ago and flint knapping, hand axes and arrow tips, etc. If you took a baby from that time and brought it up in our time, it would be just the same as us in intelligence. There's no reason for its intelligence not to be any different from ours. As much as if you took a baby from our time back to the Stone Age and it grew up there, it would learn to be a hunter-gatherer.
Yeah, it would
and
learn in that
to,
time.
to adapt to its time. And it's like going back just 200 years and thinking of somebody who would be all worried about witchcraft and everything and bringing them forward and giving them a mobile phone. They have got just as much capacity of learning how to use that tech, but they just weren't living in the time when that tech was available.
If you find that sort of thing interesting, if I may recommend a
go
book,
for
I recommend a book called Sapiens, which is one of my favourite books of all time, and it talks about us as humans and, as you say, about babies and how we're pretty useless as babies. We can't really survive too much as babies, but it goes into a lot more detail. But
no, that's one you've recommended, and I'm looking forward to reading. But again, going back to the caveman sitting there, or cavewoman, chipping away and flint knapping his arrowheads. Technically, the whole, all the materials that are required for making your mobile phone
Were there.
the potential is there.
Yeah.
In that time period, all that's missing was the ingenuity and intelligence
To stick it all together.
put it all together.
Yeah.
So we've leapt forward now to the 21st century. We've got all this technology.
We are still living off the land.
We've
Or have we been drip fed this technology from outer species?
outer or inner space. Yeah.
Okay, we need to get back onto your
Yeah,
face.
yeah, but we are touching upon, from that last sighting that Zak came up about, we are touching upon an intelligence perhaps behind.
Or definitely a sentience of some sort.
Yeah, something.
Okay.
Right, hit us with the next
Next sighting. This is from 1976.
one. Right, so we're coming
Jumped, yeah.
Yeah, bit of a jump.
Over a decade now.
This is me as a kid
This
watching
is
Doctor Who. John Pertwee.
Seeing cigars in the sky.
Would it be John Pertwee or would it be Tom Baker?
Tom Baker. Tom Baker, I think.
Early Tom Baker, yeah.
Yep. Okay. Tehran.
Tehran. Right, you don't get a lot from the Middle East that I've heard of.
Tehran, 1976. The September 19th, 1976 incident in Tehran, Iran, started much like many others, with phone calls from concerned citizens reporting bright lights in the sky. An F-4 fighter jet was sent out to investigate, but as it neared the object, its instruments blacked out, forcing the pilot to return to base. A second F-4 took its place, and as it neared the unusual light, it achieved radar lock. But according to the pilot, the UFO released a glowing object, which the pilot assumed to be some sort of missile headed straight for him. As he prepared to fight back, the pilot experienced malfunctions in his instruments, and he witnessed another bright object released from the UFO that headed straight towards the ground. He safely returned to base despite the faulty equipment.
That's interesting, kind of correlates with the previous one about
and actually
technology
that was an area that we didn't discuss.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to come back to that in a moment.
After the incident, Iran contacted the United States to aid them in the investigation. An unclassified memo by US Air Force Section Chief Lieutenant Colonel Mui detailed the events of the night. There are explanations for nearly all of them.
All right. Okay.
First, the bright light seen by civilians and possibly the pilots might have been Jupiter, which was visible in the sky that night. Second, as author Brian Dunning notes in his podcast Skeptoid, the second F-4 jet had a long history of electrical problems, meaning the instrumentation might have failed regardless of possible UFO interference. It also could explain the radar lock. It might simply have been a malfunction. For the first F-4 reports, Dunning was never turned in for maintenance following the incident, so there's no official indication that its instrumentation failed. And finally, as for the alien missiles, there was a meteor shower that night which could easily account for the sightings.
That all sounds
The Jupiter one sounds rubbish.
Rubbish,
How could it be Jupiter? Surely you'd send a plane. You can't send a plane up to look at Jupiter.
I've observed Jupiter so many times, and even it's the biggest gas giant in our solar system, and it just looks like a large star.
Exactly.
And it's so far away that you wouldn't fly towards it as a trained pilot. You're not going to go. Otherwise, you'd be flying after every single satellite that you see and things like that. No, it's Jupiter can take a run and jump.
That's interesting. I didn't really. Well, the Skeptoid, I forget his name, but the podcast that said that the F4 were known for being dodgy.
Brian Dunning.
Yeah. The chance of both planes, because they sent up two, so the chance of both of them being faulty is quite.
Yeah, that would be a huge coincidence. So you think,
and obviously both pilots have seen this bright light as well, because they wouldn't have gone up there either way.
And okay, so it's Jupiter. What the hell is shooting these bright lights?
It's the missiles.
I think we just completely.
Are they really meteors? I don't think so.
We just need to completely discount the.
I think that would sound to me, without any other evidence and just taking it on the cuff from what you've read.
Yeah.
If that was an official report, not just a made-up story. Okay, so we're talking about we are standing here believing that that's an incident that occurred.
Yeah.
I would immediately come to the point of saying something out of the ordinary happened.
Yes, definitely.
Something happened.
That's the only one that I can think that we've said so far, but perhaps a couple other ones that hasn't had a real explanation. They kind of just.
I think that if you're talking about trained Air Force pilots, they are trained for a reason.
Yeah.
You can't have them firing live rounds or anything at things just because they think they're under attack or locked on, because you could get civilian casualties. You could start a war. So I think you've got to kind of
there's a certain discipline there.
Yeah, you've got to take it on good judgment that they.
But they don't make the decisions either. It's people on the ground that make the decisions.
They'd report it in.
Yeah.
But you did mention the previous one, and so I want to hark back to that because we didn't really talk about the fact that the engines in the cars and everything were affected. And that's a very interesting point because they put that down to perhaps ball lightning or atmospheric phenomenon, but there was no storms. Now, of course, you can have lightning storms or electrical storms without rain. We're so used to combining thunderstorms with
water.
Rain, but you can have electrical storms. But if you have an electrical storm, inevitably you get the discharge of electricity, and which is the light. Well, obviously the electricity is electricity, but you're seeing the light because light travels faster than sound, and then you're hearing the thunder afterwards.
Yeah.
In your report, you never mentioned anything about anybody reporting hearing any thunder or anything, and they did say that there was no storms that time. So
I'm not a mechanic or anything, but would it have the capability of taking out that many cars as just lightning? Because an engine run, I'm not sure, it's not connected to any outer electrical source or anything.
Right. So if we go back to the Carrington effect back in the late 1800s, that was a solar storm which hit the planet and knocked out all the telegraph at the time, burnt out wires, sent telegraph machines haywire. It was a very, very powerful electrical storm solar storm, should I say, of charged solar particles hitting the Earth.
Yeah.
And the sun is always belching out these bursts of energy.
Flares
And it's predicted that we're likely to get hit by a major one at any point. And to be honest with you, this is kind of a different subject, but if we were hit by a very high Carrington effect solar storm,
Or equivalent to.
it would fry all electronic equipment
Oh
on
no,
the planet.
we'll lose
planet.
the podcast.
Yeah, it would, because it would take out ground-based power plants.
Everything.
Satellites would be zapped.
Unfortunately, listeners, you'd have to forgive us if that did happen.
Let's do a live show. And
Yeah, we'd basically be out there with wax tablets,
Yeah.
but only if you can have the skills to actually melt wax by making fire. So, listeners, do practice your firelighting skills just in case. But no, so a Carrington effect, a solar storm can create what we would refer to as an EMP.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's
Electrical magnetic
it's a
pulse. Yeah.
And that's the way Zak described the engines cutting out and things. Well, I can't see it being anything other than a kind of EMP.
A natural EMP.
Well, I don't know. I've not really heard of any natural EMPs that have occurred apart from the Carrington effect, which was a solar storm. And
That would have been planet-wide, though, wouldn't it?
well, I don't know if it was planet-wide. I'd have to go and research that. Carrington, it's named as Carrington effect because it was the chap Carrington who observed it in, I believe, the Americas, and so the Earth is only going to, on its as it turns on its axis, whether only one side of the planet is affected by a solar storm like that, or I don't know how it interferes with the Earth's own electrical field.
I mean, nowadays it would probably wipe out the planet because everything's all connected in one big network. So.
It would blast out all the satellites and everything.
Yeah.
That's a subject for another. We should do one on what if.
World-ending events.
World-ending events.
Keep it light.
Yeah.
Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, we're doing an apocalyptic podcast, and listeners, any suggestions, put them in the comments. But that effect and same similar effect with those aircraft would be some kind of small EMP kind of effect.
Yeah, whether or not it's natural or intentional.
Intentional. But that's the only thing I can think of that would interfere with electronics or electrics. Would
Fair
be
enough.
something to do on those scales.
And that would feed into the whole F4 jets
Yeah.
going down as well. So.
Yeah, that would surely cause such a malfunction on a plane that it possibly would.
I will say at this point, I'm not sure how many more stories there are, but they're all two more stories to go, but they're all very similar in terms of there's a through line between almost all of them, or kind of connective tissue between all of them.
Okay, all right. So, Zak, hit us with your next one.
Okay. Rendlesham Forest, 1980.
Rendlesham Forest, that sounds like it's UK.
In December 1980, US Air Force members
was US.
stationed at
Again.
two British Royal Air
sorry.
Force bases,
It was.
Woodbridge and Bentwaters, reported seeing strange colourful lights above Rendlesham Forest, about 100 miles northeast of London. One man who entered the forest to investigate claimed to have discovered some sort of spacecraft there. And the next day, others confirmed damage to nearby trees and a higher than normal level of radiation at that site.
And what year was this?
1980.
Several days later, more sightings were reported.
Ooh.
Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt recorded his observations on an audio tape as he watched the lights. And while not definitive proof, theorists consider this the strongest evidence of the events. But the UK's Ministry of Defence, which oversaw reports of UFO incidents until the early 2000s, didn't find any credible threat to the nation and didn't pursue investigations further. As at Roswell, UFO tourism is prevalent in Rendlesham Forest, and there's even an official Rendlesham UFO trail that visitors can hike, off of which sits a model of the reported spacecraft.
Looks like
There you
another
go.
outside
That's another.
podcast.
Add that to the list.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, Rendlesham Forest.
Right,
And
that's
Roswell.
1980. That was 1980 in the
Yes,
UK this
yes.
time.
Out of interest, what was the guy's name who recorded the audio thing? I'd just be interested to know if there was actually...
Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt. Halt.
Is that just Charles Holt?
Yeah.
So I've just looked up the audio files that were mentioned in that story. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt. So I just found this. I'm not sure if this is the actual one, but I'd assume it is. So we'll play a
Let's listen
short
to a bit.
clip of that.
150 feet or more from the initial, I should say, suspected impact point. Have a lift on it. It can't get the light all to work. There seems to be some kind of mechanical problem. But as soon as I get another light, you can tell we're going to take some readings with the gather cutter and chase around here a little bit, waiting for another light all to come back in.
Okay.
It's very broken, but
It's very broken. So if that wasn't clear, it's
mentioned something about a mechanical.
it sounded like he was observing something that had possibly had a mechanical problem and had crashed into the forest.
That's what it sounded like from what we could decipher.
Yeah. So again,
Yeah.
obviously not just an individual, but
I love it when there's actual kind of solid
yeah.
proof, I should say.
Yeah.
Proof as in
Yeah.
quotations, because
I really want to visit there now.
Yeah.
Rendlesham Forest.
Yeah, well, can I jump in with one?
Yeah.
Because
Of course.
your ones have been tracking through the decades.
Yeah. I've
And
got
I-
one more after
Okay.
this.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to take it back slightly
Mm-hmm.
because when we discussed that we were going to do this podcast, I thought, okay, I want to look at ones, but I wanted to kind of steer clear of possibly those individuals that said, oh, I was driving down the road and my car cut out and then there was an alien spaceship landed in the field next to me and 2 aliens came out and they took me on board, probed me. And the next thing I do, I woke up and like 8 hours of my life had disappeared in a flash, because there's absolutely no way you can collaborate those kind of stories. I wanted something. I said, okay, what I'm going to look out for is something where, like we've been having in the as we've been progressing through the decades with Zak, where you've got multiple people.
It started off with
seeing something.
one person,
person
maybe
Yeah.
two,
making
but
a
now
call.
it's growing.
It's growing, and that's why I just wanted to jump in because
Yeah.
I want to take it back to April the 6th, 1966.
Okay.
But this time in Westall, which is in Melbourne, Australia.
A few days before my birthday.
I don't know if you had of the Westall incident.
No.
No,
Right.
I don't know. I
Well, the
recall.
Westall incident, they had a school teacher taking a class when a student came into the class saying, "Teacher, there's a flying saucer outside." So at this point, the terminology of flying saucer was something that was obviously everybody was familiar with. So he got all of his class of students to go outside into the playground.
Yeah.
And they all observed this flying disc
And the teacher.
and the teacher.
Oh.
But moreover, as it came out, over 200 people
Oh, blimey, in the area.
observed this
Wow.
in the area.
200 people.
200 people.
That's a lot of people.
The disc actually landed. There was an impression left on the grass
geez.
where it landed. And I've actually, I'll see if I can find it in a second. They've got a picture that I downloaded, which was a sketch made by somebody. I don't know if you can see this. So it's a circular imprint into the grass, and it's got 3 dots that separate imprints within the circle. But somebody drew this. But as I say, 200 people saw this flying saucer, observed it land and take off again. And the teacher asked his students to come back into the classroom and to draw what they'd just seen.
Yeah.
So they were all independently drawing stuff. And I watched a documentary where all these years later, they managed to find some of the students that were in that class and as adults asked them if they could sit in a room separate from each other and draw what they've seen.
Yeah.
And then compare the pictures all these years later.
What did they find?
But they all look
Ident-
almost identical.
Yeah.
They were flying saucer
Jeez.
with lights around it. Interesting point, though, is that at the time, the teacher had knocks at the door from the military saying, you didn't see what you saw. What you saw was a high-tech weather balloon. It wasn't a UFO. You did not see that. And he said, yeah, but I did see that. And loads of other people saw it. And he was told that if he wanted to keep his job, it would be very simple for it to be said that he was drunk while he was on duty with the children.
Jeez.
And it would ruin his career.
Ruin him, yeah.
And and supposedly students had people knocking at the door, and these are young kids
Yeah.
knocking at the door, telling the kids you didn't see what you
It's
thought
like
you saw.
something out of Stranger Things.
Yeah, very much
But
so.
to this day, there has been no official government report
Yeah.
on that incident.
Wow.
But over 200 people did see it,
200 people.
Wow. Yeah.
and for me, that was telling.
That picture you've shown is
Yeah.
almost like your classic crop
Yeah,
circle, isn't it?
Crop circle, but it was an indentation that was left, and supposedly where it landed, within an hour, military had
Descended upon
descended
it.
So it
upon
must
it,
have been-
cordoned off that area.
Yeah.
Nobody was allowed to go near it at all.
And where was this, Australia? did you
This
say?
is Melbourne, Australia.
Blimey.
A place called Westall.
Because I've never heard of that.
No, I've
No,
not heard that.
I hadn't heard that one. That's why it suddenly jumped out at me,
Yeah.
because of such a huge amount of people.
Did the
and all the
guy, did he lose his job or?
No, he kept stum.
Kept quiet until now.
He's retired,
Okay.
and
You can't hurt me now.
he's retired, and of course, we go back kind of to what I was saying. It's in recent years, it's that sudden change of terms from UFO to UAP that kind of hints towards the gradual acceptance by governments that these things do exist, and that in a way they're preparing the general public for the acceptance
Yeah.
of being told the truth, in not the too distant future about where these things are from.
It's always like going way back to the beginning of this podcast when we were saying about how UFOs are just kind of that blanket term for like, oh, there's a UFO, it's a flying saucer. Now it's got more of like a official, in quotations, official name.
Yeah.
It feels more official.
You always felt that if there was a sighting, and especially if it was perhaps actual, not a natural phenomenon, but a phenomenon with, as I say, intelligence behind it, that the government, whichever, would jump on it, stamp on it, and make sure that anybody that knew about it would be closed down. Now, it seems like there's a complete change in policy.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So if something were to come out, we wouldn't be as surprised as
Well,
we...
no, I don't think. I mean, if you took a straw poll now, if you went out and just asked anybody in the street, and you got your clipboard and you said, if the governments or whomever announced that they had first contact, would that concern you? I bet you 10 to 1, most people say, well, not really. Or, well, we probably could do with somebody else to run the country.
We've been
do
through
a far
worse.
better job than Boris and stuff.
Jeez.
Don't
Don't get too topical.
No, I'm not getting too topical, and I want to stay neutral on that point. But my point is that I don't think that the acceptance would be a bother.
Yeah.
I don't think people would be running for their pitchforks going, no.
I feel like things like religion would be hugely
And then you've got that other side where
questioned.
there'd be the huge amount of people that would go to worship them as gods.
Well, you always get that kind of thing depicted in kind of
Independence Day, when they're on top of the tower, going,
it's like,
"We love you, aliens,"
Yeah, I mean,
and then they get blasted.
well, to be honest with you, it wasn't. Recently, I went to see Brian Blessed on stage. Absolutely fantastic actor, absolutely brilliant bloke.
Hawkman,
dive! Gordon's alive!
Just picture him in his little tiny pants.
I tell you, he was awesome. If you get the chance to see Brian Blessed, brilliant. But what I discovered about Brian Blessed, he describes himself as 50% actor, 50% adventurer. Because obviously, as you probably well know, he's been up Everest. He did that without oxygen. He wore the traditional climbing gear.
Story
Oh
of it.
wow!
Yeah.
That's really cool.
He's somebody who...
The story of him punching a polar bear is one of my favourites.
Yeah, I didn't get the chance to ask him about that. I'll certainly go back and see him again. Maybe I can ask him that time. But Brian, if you hear this podcast, we'd love to get you on board. Come and do a podcast with us. Because when I was there and I was listening to Brian Blessed on stage, it turned out he's got a fascination in space. I was sitting there thinking, geez, you've got the same kind of ideas and outlooks that I have. And it was like Tina, my wife, was turning to me and saying, gee, he's...
You get along.
you guys get on like a house on fire. But as he said that he felt we were at a juncture in humanity where we're still just babies.
Yeah.
But we need help. And he was saying that how he felt that what we need to do is to get onto the big space telescope. Name escapes me at the moment that's been put out.
Hubble?
No, not Hubble. It's the new radio telescope that's way out in space. Oh, I'll come back to that. But we should be beaming out a literal SOS.
Yeah.
To say,
help us.
Come and help us.
Our planet is dying.
Well, no, it's not kind of our planet is dying as much as we've got to a stage in our growth. We need
help to sustain ourselves.
To show us how to. Yeah,
What do we do now?
He was saying we are amazing. We are a fantastic race of wonderful creatures, but we kind of need a guiding hand
Yeah.
to help us because that's the stage we've got to. And I just thought that was a
We
fascinating.
can only hope they're friendly.
Yeah.
Well, that's a discussion I want to have in the alien one.
Yeah, we've touched on aliens.
I want to talk about that, but we're going back to the UFOs.
We've probed the aliens,
Okay.
but we've not quite.
Yeah,
Have you?
or they probed us. But yeah, so 200 people saw it. Absolutely cross-referenced all these sightings.
That's certainly the
Boom.
biggest,
Westall, Melbourne, Australia. If you've not known about it, listeners, go look it up.
certainly the biggest pool of witnesses that we've had in any of these stories so far.
Yeah. And
Probably since as well.
Yeah, yeah. And so we've on to your last.
My last sighting.
It's better be a good one. This better answer all of our questions.
Okay, it's only 3 paragraphs. So, final sighting. The Belgium Wave, 1989 to 1990.
Is that like a Mexican wave?
Well, let's find out. At the end of November 1989, citizens of Belgium reported seeing a large triangular UFO hovering in the sky. But beyond the visual sightings, no evidence was found of any UFO's existence. A few months later, in March 1990, new sightings of multiple objects were reported, confirmed by 2 military ground radar stations. 2 F-16 fighter jets were sent out to investigate the anomalies, and though the pilots could not see anything visually, they were able to lock onto their targets with radar. But the UFOs moved so fast that the pilots ended up losing them. Some 13,500 people
Wow.
are estimated to have witnessed the incident.
Okay.
Okay, so
Making-
slightly bigger than 200. I thought it was doing well on 200.
Blown your story out of the
Yeah, I've been it's one-upmanship.
Making it one of the most widely experienced UFO sightings of the modern era. The Belgian Air Force had no logical explanation for the activity, but it acknowledged that an unknown activity had taken place in the air. The Belgians reached out to the UK's Ministry of Defence to investigate further, but once they determined that the incident was not a hostile or aggressive one, they stopped the investigation.
I was going to say maybe it was a huge advertising campaign by Toblerone. This big triangular shape, but that's not Belgian chocolate. That's Swiss. So,
Anyway, back to UFOs.
I think there was something like that actually about a Coca-Cola thing. There was I didn't go into too much detail, but there was a Coca-Cola campaign that was mistaken for an alien invasion.
Oh, no.
in Belgium.
Well, we'll go into that on the alien episode.
Yeah, go to the- Actually, I just remember the name. It was the James Webb Space Telescope.
Okay,
They recently
yeah.
sent up.
Okay.
It's meant to be looking right back in time to the most distant parts of the beginnings of the universe.
God.
So that's interesting. But yeah, SOS.
13,500
That's
people.
huge.
13,000.
That's a stadium full of people.
Yeah. What you did mention also in that was you mentioned about they contact the British government.
Yeah. Why have we got to deal with it?
Well, I'm collaborating. Maybe it's because we got, I don't know, your British military.
They didn't mention it had a Union Jack flying on top of it.
Yeah. In fact, it seems to be quite a thing. Triangular shapes for
Yes.
Yeah, it's
UAPs.
that instance. Was it the singular triangular shape, or was it again kind of this V formation of things?
Yeah, well, going by the evidence that we've had previously, that's where my mind went to say that it was like a V formation.
Of 3 dots.
Yeah, and if it's anything like that one previously with the...
Although
one that we
I
said-
have seen footage of a triangular shape that's been videoed, whether it's pucker video or not, I don't know, but rather than 3 dots of light, it's been actually a triangular shape, so who knows. But that's a huge amount of people. And interestingly enough, you mentioned about the British government, as I say, and I went on to, and you can do this as well, listeners, you just go on to the britishgov.org website, which is the official British government website. You can actually download documents for UFO sightings.
Wow.
Yeah.
Blimey.
We can put a link in the description.
Because I downloaded a PDF. It was the latest one on there, which was 2009. So I assume there is a sort of lead time in these things before they're released.
I think
So
there is
they
something to
kind
do
of-
with classified files.
Yeah,
Have to be.
classified file.
They can only be classified for a certain amount
But
of time.
I downloaded it from the official government website onto my phone.
Have you had a knock at the door yet?
Not yet. Not yet, but 40 pages
40.
Bloody hell.
of just sightings in 2009.
And that's just in the UK.
Both from public and from members of the military, etc. in the UK. A real interesting one. I'll show it to you
Jeez.
later. But
Yeah.
you could just keep going and going through.
Go
that.
down a rabbit hole.
Well, that's just a testament to the fact that it would seem, from what we have discovered during this episode, UFOs do exist.
Yeah, I've got no doubt.
Yeah,
UFOs
yeah.
exist, but what they are is that's the
Yeah,
It does
it's
feel like we're on,
defining it.
we're on the
Defining.
cusp of something, doesn't it? It feels like with the whole renaming,
the renaming, the
how these government files are starting to come out.
the releasing official video
Yeah.
of military jet fighters being engaged. In fact, shall I bring it right up to up to date?
It's like
Yeah.
as Brian Blessed said when he said about the fact that we're on a juncture. It feels like we are
Yeah,
getting to the point now where it's
yeah,
possibly
possibly
going to be a big announcement.
Yeah. So with the particular one, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Tic Tac.
Yeah.
Okay, you
engagements.
mentioned it earlier.
yeah,
Yeah. So
I do like a Tic Tac.
I do like a Tic Tac. Yeah. Whenever we're filming, Jack has always got Tic Tacs.
They're very nice.
We always
Very
rely
nice.
on Jack bringing Tic Tacs onto the film set. So in November the 14th, 2004, and I think this information was released in 2017, officially released. But November 14th, 2004, in the Pacific Ocean, Tic Tac video was taken from a US Navy fighter jet. Now, that fighter jet had flown out from a nuclear aircraft carrier, the USS Nimzit, and that was accompanied by the USS missile cruiser Princeton. And not only did this, the initial fighter pilots spot these, and it wasn't just one, but these Tic Tac unidentified objects, but also they were picked up on the radar of the ships as well. Radar operators spotted it, and it says that about 2 p.m. two FA-18 Super Hornet fighter jets from the Nimzit received an unusual order from an operations officer aboard the Princeton. They were already airborne, and the pilots, they were told to stop their training manoeuvres and proceed to new coordinates for a real-world task. That's all they were told. The Princeton's highly advanced radar had picked up mysterious objects from over the course of several days, and the Navy called them anomalous aerial vehicles. That was where we get the AAV from.
Okay. So that was the first time that was coined as that.
I assume so.
Yeah.
A term that the military has preferred to use for unidentified flying objects instead of using the normal term of UFOs, which has been tainted by the association with flying saucers and little green men.
Yeah, which is what we've discussed.
And
Yeah.
the report also said, and countless crackpots, which I loved.
Savage.
Okay, a bit savage. So, according to Kevin Day, the Princeton senior radar operator at the time, his screen showed over 100 AAVs over the course of a week. He said, these are his words, watching them on the display was like watching snow fall from the sky. 2 fighters were diverted to intercept one of the strange objects. When they first arrived on the scene, the pilots didn't see any flying objects, but they did observe what the lead pilot, Commander David Fravor, later referred to as a disturbance in the ocean. The water was churning with white waves breaking over what looked like a large object under the surface. That's interesting. They then noticed one of the objects flying about 50 feet above the water. Fravor, the commander of the elite Black Aces Squadron, who was a Top Gun program graduate with more than 16 years flying experience, described it as about 40 feet long, shaped like a Tic Tac candy, and with no obvious means of propulsion. It's, and these are his words, it's white, it has no wings, it has no rotors. I go, holy shit, what is that? Yeah. Even odder were its swift and erratic movements, which Fravor described as something he had never seen in his life. This thing, this is again his words, this thing would go from one way to another, similar to as if you were throwing a ping pong ball against the wall.
So very unnatural movements.
Very
again.
unnatural, and I want to come to that for a personal experience I had in that myself in a moment when I finish this. But anyway, just to finish this one off, as the Tic Tac accelerated into the distance, according to Day, Navy jets began launching off the carrier to try and intercept the other mysterious objects the Princeton's radar was tracking. And while Fravor wasn't able to capture the encounter on video, one of the pilots who took off after he landed was able to track it down. He managed to capture video of the Tic Tac using a highly sensitive infrared camera.
Yeah, we saw a clip from that, didn't we?
We did, and we had a look at that before we came into the studio.
Yes.
And yeah, that was quite amazing.
Fast. I was surprised how fast it was.
It was. I mean, some people have suggested that perhaps that disturbance underwater could have been another country's submarine, and it was sending off drones of some high-tech drones.
Maybe.
So that's speculative.
Yeah.
But if so, for them to be so high-tech and to be able to, I've heard it described as moving at like a hypersonic speed,
Yeah.
then stopping and changing direction.
It's interesting.
like,
He
in
says
an
like,
instant.
there's no actual. Like, you can't see any propulsion on it, so it can't be like a drone that has rotors or anything on it.
Well,
Because
that's right. He said they
yeah.
couldn't see any visible
Exactly.
sort of propulsion, and that brought back, and I mentioned it earlier, a memory from when I was probably about 12 to 13. In the early 80s, and funny story behind this as well, because when I was at school, I was just starting secondary school, or I'd started secondary school, and the teacher wanted us all to do a project on something that we were passionate about. And so because I'd seen and observed different things, I kept a little notebook with all my observations in.
Oh, wow.
And I remember at school I presented that project with all my observations in.
Do you still have the book? Can we look through it?
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be great. Follow up.
I know I have got some of my old school stuff that I didn't dump that might be up in the attic, so who knows, it might still reside there. But I do have a clear image of my mind where I'd drawn pictures of
We have to find it.
that one I described earlier of the cigar-shaped object going behind the clouds and things, which in later life, as I say, that was probably just a plane. However, the thing that got me about that project was really annoying because the teacher put a big red X through it in red writing saying, "Did you report any of this?" I mean, who the hell do I report it to? I can't
You're just
ring up the
you're a
police.
teenager.
I'm just a kid. And when I spoke to him in class, or more, rather, he spoke to me. He said, "Well, if you didn't report it, then you've made it all up." So thanks. I felt really,
Yeah, it's not that they teach you where to report these things in class, do they?
I
All those
know.
hours of effort.
And I felt really flat, and I never forgot that. And anyway, but the thing was, I know that one of the observations, probably the last observation I had in that, was when my parents were out for the evening, and I'm assuming it was winter time because it was dark. It was evening time and dark, so it couldn't have been summer because we're in summer at the moment. It doesn't get dark till very, very late. And my parents had been out, and they came home. My mum came in to get me and said there was something outside. Come and look at this. And they knew I was an avid astronomer because they bought me my first telescope for observing things. And I went outside. I looked up, and if you can imagine a completely dark night sky with all the constellations out, initially I had to kind of zoom in and sort of, what am I looking at? And then this thing just zoomed across the sky, straight across the sky, at an incredible speed. So at that distance, it must have been covering a huge distance itself. You would initially think, "Oh, I've just seen a shooting star," but shooting stars burn up in the atmosphere and
Disappear.
and it stopped.
Oh, stop dead.
So when my eye caught it, it was obviously standing still at the time,
Yeah.
and then it zoomed across the sky at probably that described hypersonic speed, stopped, which meant I could keep my eye on it, and then it zoomed off at an angle, going upwards, higher towards the zenith, stopped, came straight down across the sky towards the horizon, but not as low as the horizon, and then just, again, paused for a moment, and then flew off again in a dead straight line and disappeared, never to be seen again.
It's again that unnatural movement.
It was
seems to be a
completely
theme.
unnatural. Never seen anything like that. Never seen anything like that since. Both my parents were there at the time, and I could only describe it as being it would have blended in with the rest of the stars in the sky. It's
Yeah.
a pinpoint of light.
So if you just briefly glanced up and it was standing still, you just think it was a star. Yeah.
And I've seen plenty of satellites coming over. Yeah, they track over nice and slowly. We've seen the new Elon Musk Starlink satellite chain coming over.
Yeah.
And none of those emit their own light. They're just reflecting sunlight off them when you see them.
None of them would move that erratically either.
So for something like that, I'm assuming it was either reflecting light off its body, hence why you could see it. I can't say that it was shining in any other noticeable colour difference or blinking. It certainly wasn't blinking. It was just like this point of light which zipped,
Yeah.
and then it was gone. So that, when I read about the release of the Tic Tac incident, I thought, well, I observed that way back in the early 80s, another object doing a similar thing.
Yeah.
So for me, that makes me totally convinced that these phenomena are something, and when it moves like that, that there is some kind of
Yeah.
intelligence or some kind of
There's a
Motivation.
motive, there's
Yeah.
a drive
it's-
behind it.
That
Sentience,
couldn't
yeah.
have been just some random atmospheric
Anomaly.
Yeah.
natural nature type produced
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. So so that was my own personal sighting of a tic tac, if you want to call it that. But yeah. So
Oh, wow.
In conclusion,
in conclusion,
UFOs, they exist.
so what do you think, Jack?
I'm more convinced now, especially that there might be sentience behind these UFOs, UAPs, whatever you want to call it, than I was before I came into the studio today.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if they're. We'll leave that to the discussion on aliens of where these.
But I
are
think
being
it's
brought.
that kind of theme between all of the stories that we've heard today. Like they've all got similar connective tissue that kind of they all have similar kind of reports or movements or
And
lights.
they seem to have gone from the original report in 1947 of one guy in his plane, nobody else has viewed it,
Yeah.
no photographs, through to ones where you've got literally
Yeah.
not hundreds but
Thousands.
thousands of
If they were
people
all
seeing.
wildly different, then I'd be like, oh, okay, some of these might be made up. But the fact that they're all very similar stories.
I think it's fair to say that there is definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, something.
Yes.
there. And it's just could be coincidental, but it feels as if the way that the authorities, the governments are trying to be more eased up about it, have a task force now in the States and let this information out readily. I don't know.
Could we be on the cusp of actually learning
Maybe will
or
they say
admitting that there's something out there?
You know,
But that's the thing. When something is identified, it is no longer a UFO.
Mm.
yeah.
It would be, for instance, the alien spaceship.
So
Yeah.
I think we'll leave it to our alien section
Yes.
to maybe delve into whether we think that these are
I'm going to ancient aliens as
ancient
well. Which,
aliens.
Yeah.
And see whether we think that perhaps moving on from the UFOs themselves as a phenomenon, if there is an intelligence behind them, what is that intelligence? Could there possibly be extraterrestrial intelligence?
is it a threat or is
a
it
threat?
safe?
Does it mean war? Does it mean exploration? Who knows? But we'll look into that. And of course, listeners, if you've got any examples of experiences that you've had, we'd love to hear about those. You can leave them in the comments below, or if you want, if you go to the Zak Wylde Productions website, you can pick up the Zak Wylde Productions email address and send your stories in via email if it's easier for you. And we're more than happy to bring those up in a further episode and dedicate it to you and read your stories out. And we want that feedback. We want to find out all these things. We want to learn.
Yes. And if there are any stories that are similar to the ones we've heard today, possibly flying lights in the sky.
Be interesting comparison.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If they feed into that similar theme.
So I think that leads us on to
Yes.
our
Our famous
episode.
segment
Yes.
that we're becoming quite fond of on the Now We Know show. So this is the Now We Know flashback, which is a segment of the show where we look back at any developments that have been on any previous episodes.
Yep.
Obviously with the Now We Know show, so we open up conversations about certain
That's what it's about.
subjects and we learn about them. So any developments that we'll look into on the Now We Know flashback. So recently on the show we had a special guest, Mickey Bolden,
Yes,
Yep.
our paranormal investigator.
Yes.
Good episode.
talk about what is a ghost.
Yep.
And he told lots of stories. As you've listened to that episode, you'll know that there's so many stories to get your teeth
If you
into.
haven't listened to it, go and listen to it.
Yes, definitely. But since then, we've had another kind of mini event or possible account of,
Yeah.
Was it
of
more
paranormal
than-
activity.
Okay.
So Mickey writes, he messaged me after the show. He said, I completely forgot to share this with you. I had made contact through the Ouija board with a child, and half an hour later, when I went upstairs, I found this imprint in the carpet.
Oh, wow.
It was a couple of years ago now. So I've got a picture.
I just sort of like thinking of the imprint of a whole child.
So there we
Oh
are.
gosh.
It's a hand.
So what we're looking at, listeners, is Jack showing us a photograph that Mickey has obviously sent over, and it's literally like a hand has been pressed into a big shag pile carpet.
There is a second picture with the
Oh yeah, so Mickey's got
full
his,
size hand
he's
next to
got
it.
his full adult hand
that
against
does
it.
resemble a thumb, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That curve.
It's like a left hand, possibly, yeah.
Yeah, left
Yeah.
hand of a small child. That's,
So
that's
how
really
weird.
weird.
That's
There we
freaky.
are.
So there you go, listeners.
We dig
well,
deeper
thanks
into
for
that.
sending that in, Mickey.
It'd be great to do a follow-up episode.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when we get you back in for our next paranormal episode, then
We'll discuss that in further
you
detail.
can
yeah.
tell us all about that. Brilliant.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe to this channel and comment below any suggestions of topics or activities you'd like to listen to in future episodes.
So that's a big UFO goodbye from Buzz.
That's a massive UAP goodbye from Jack.
And a saucy goodbye from Zak.
Goodbye, all.
Goodbye.
Now we know
No
show.
show. Now we know show in UFOs.
UFOs.